I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what makes it difficult for us to unplug? And if you want to share your response to that in the chat function. And if you're more comfortable just stopping and reflecting on that question, for you, what makes it difficult to unplug? Certainly, the demands of the industry, the reality that there is no separation between work and home. And, that because because of our nature, who we are, we don't like keeping people waiting. So we feel like, we're at the mercy of when others want us. So, and for each of us, it's going to be something different. And when we think of technology and how it has this tendency to overrun our lives just because of what everyone has said in the chat function, and it is really designed to keep us coming back. It speaks to the way that our mind works, and more. And then it taps into that fear of missing out, that desire to not missing out. And I think another question that we need to ask ourselves is, what am I missing out on because of technology? And I think that's the theme of everything that we've talked about these last 6 weeks. And, cell phone addiction or dependency or compulsiveness, depending on what it's called, it's becoming very real. And, and it's, again, when we cross those lines and when it becomes compulsive to the point that it's dominating or it's interfering with what we call normal life, and when it is causing more and more stress on our relationships, when it becomes the organizing principle and that fix, it's like that itch is what's calling at us. And that internal or external stress is another way we can look at it, of when that itch happens, how we respond to it. And when we think of even, cell phones and how in that little phone, in that thing that sits in our palm, there are all kinds of addictive behaviors that are inside of it. So it's not an all or nothing situation. It's about recognizing, because awareness is always the first step in anything before we can change. So when we look at, conditioning, when we look at how habits are formed, there's the stimulus, there's that itch that happens, and then there's our response. And what happens in our brain is all of those reward signals in our brains go off. So some examples are your phone buzzes, and it creates that need for us to know. We want to know. And then what happens is we pick it up and we read it. And what has happened there is that it's satisfied that itch. So now what happens is that picking up that phone is associated with the phone buzzing. So we don't even stop to think of it. We don't stop to ask, is this the right time? Do I have the right amount of energy? And in some of the new research that's coming out about the brain and the neuroscience of this, and even about how habits are formed, unless we have, so this is my story, okay? I think I'll just send a quick email. I'll just send the quick I'll send the quick text. I'll do the whatever it is, thinking that it's going to be quick. And now they're saying, if you don't have 2 minutes to deal with whatever that is, don't do it. So when we think of that internal stress that it's causing, because in the back of our mind, we realize that we're ignoring something else while we're doing this. So how about when we're sitting there and we're going through our emails, Okay. And we start to feel that amount of stress, that overwhelm, that everything is so out of control. Or when the everything comes in marked as urgent. Now, and urgent used to be saved for life-threatening, but it's not even that anymore. Everybody needs things immediately. There's no such thing as delayed gratification anymore. It's urgent, urgent, urgent. So what happens when we get into that stress or that overwhelm? A lot of times we just, log into Facebook, log into Instagram, so that we can start feeling a little bit different than we're feeling in that moment. And yeah, a fantastic book, The Power of Habit. There's another one called Atomic Habits. James Cleary has just come out with one. And there's all sorts of new information that is being put out there. And we read the book thinking that reading the book is enough. But what we need to remember is that knowing isn't enough. We need to be aware in each and every moment. So, the other thing that I'm seeing right now, and I think that everyone that I've talked to, and it doesn't matter what industry it is feeling that I'm so done. We're all feeling burnout. And this seminar is really the follow-up to last week's, which was overcoming burnout. This is like overcoming burnout 2.0. So when we can't make a decision because everything seems to be an overwhelm, and we feel stuck, we feel like we just can't make a decision. What do? Even if we're standing in line, we pick up our phone and we text a friend, or we, check something. And the next time, because of the way that our brain is, those neurons are now programmed, what happens is the next time that we're feeling that, what do? So all of the treatment, and again, it's not everybody is going to identify as being addicted to something. We can call it attached to, dependent on, but it's not an all or nothing thing. We need to remember that it's like food. People that have disordered eating, it's not about total abstinence. It's about awareness in each moment of what emotion is driving the response. Because a lot of times that stimulus is we're feeling something and we want to feel something else. So when we think of even our habits are the way that our brain, basically it conserves energy. And our habits either help or are they hinder. And if we had to sit down every time we got into our car to drive, if we had to relearn how to drive every time we got in the car, it would just be information overload. So it's, again, about awareness. And whether we call it awareness, or we call it mindfulness, or we call it consciousness, it's about being aware in the moment of the choices that we're making and asking ourselves, is this choice hindering or is this choice helping? So when we think of, and I love this quote about how almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And when we get caught up in that space where we can't make a decision, or we're caught up in overwhelm, it's the difference between being stressed and being overwhelmed. Stress is supposed to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when we get in overwhelm, our circuitry, Stephanie and I were talking before people logged in about electricity, and about how, when there's an overload, the circuits blow. And when our circuits blow, or when we recognize that our circuits are about to be blown, that's when we need to step in. So this isn't just about technology. This is about really stopping and asking ourselves, what is running your life? And this may be a conversation that we need to have with someone, a trusted friend, a counselor, a coach, and you have an EAP that may be a resource for you to help figure this out. Because again, as we're stepping into whatever this, this next bit is going to be, we need to be aware. So it's not about beating ourselves up. It's just about noticing, I notice this is running my life. And then asking ourselves, what is the simplicity that you'd like? And even our relationship with doing nothing, our relationship with taking vacation, our relationship with just simplifying our life, because things just seem to be really complicated these days. So imaging in, imagining, what is the simplicity that you would like? And, for a lot of us, we've got multiple layers of care that we need to provide. And it's about being realistic about resources, time, energy, or money. And then asking yourself, what would appropriate limits be? Again, it's not like the gambler who needs to completely abstain from anything that causes that itch, that dopamine hit in their brain. It's not like the person with substance abuse disorders that the thought of it is what lights up the reward centers, and they need to reach for it. And then writing it down. Writing it down, because then it takes it out of our head and it puts it down on paper. And it's fascinating because even technology now has all of the limits built in. But what happens when we ignore the limits? Because our brain is it's just so accustomed to alerts coming in or finding workarounds. So we put an app in, or we put a time limit on something, and then we find a workaround. We call it, doing something else, picking up a different source of technology. And then it's about being aware that nothing is 100%. There's no such thing as perfect. And it's about making small gains. It's about recognizing what works and what doesn't work and adjusting as needed. And I noticed this when we got off of the airplane. We're in California for a month practicing retirement. And I noticed it as soon as we were stuck on the tarmac for a half an hour, and I watched everybody around us pulling out their phones, and you could hear the dings all over. And even that phrase that I use a lot, where attention goes, energy flows. It was fascinating. My husband and I had the conversation afterwards about how even looking at that little screen on the airplane, I couldn't concentrate on the movie that I was watching, because I could see flashing on the person in between the seats in front of us. And it was just another example for me of how, where attention goes, energy flows. And our brains they're just all over the place now. And that's why all of these tools become so important. So when we think of adjusting or managing, I don't even want to say controlling, but managing our relationship with screens. And let's take the word technology out, because sometimes we don't even think of our television screens as being part of technology. So when we look at the 4 different categories and what we need to manage better, and the secret to time management is really about knowing what our distractions are. It's about knowing what takes us off balance. We sit down and we have our plan, and life is what happens when I'm busy making other plans, but recognizing our relationship with time, and time either expands or it shrinks. And some of the in my next slide, I'll get to that. Let me just give you the overview of these first. I get ahead of myself when I'm talking. And the next is relationship management, or relationship simplicity. What is our relationship with our phones? What is our relationship with our loved ones? Now, what is it that what is it that we've kind of let go of, or who is it that we've let go of and, filled it up with something else because we had to these last 2 years. And then when we look at self-management, um, well, that's what we've been talking about all along, hasn't it? And then looking at our space and even reimagining our space. And when I think of space, I think not only of the environment around me, but I think about the space inside of me. And when I'm all shriveled up, when I'm shrunk up, then there's not space. When I think of even our lungs, and when we're hunched over our laptop, when we're holding our breath, so I'll share this story with you. My osteopath was telling me the story of, he was treating a woman and she was laying on the table. And as he was treating her, every time she got an email, she would pick up her arm and read it. And he could physically feel the constrictions in her body as she was reading it. So he asked her to take her watch off and put it somewhere else. And she had that feeling, that fear of missing out. And when she could physically feel that in herself, and then for him as the treater, he could feel the difference in so much of her skeletal frame when it wasn't even on her body. So for each of us, it's going to be different. So there are all kinds of books. I did a quick search just on screen life balance, and there were 129 million articles that came up. Even Google has a 4-step formula for getting more balance in your life when it comes to our screen time. So when we think of time management, turning off our notifications, asking ourselves when we sit down, what is my most important task? And then once we're aware of what our distractions are, that's when we can either block those apps or block the websites. And for each of us, that's going to be different. And it was hilarious going into the grocery store earlier this week without having a phone, to have my app to see what the specials were. So creating those start and finish times, and we're working an average anywhere from, well, they say the average is 48 minutes longer, but the people that I talk to say it's like 3 hours longer because of those boundaries not being there with home and life. And then having deep focus time, giving yourself a period. And if you start off small and then work up, but now they're saying, to take 2 hours a day where you're just focusing on what your priority is, what it is that you need to get done. And whether that's spending time with your family or it's working on a project, but giving yourself that gift. And back to productivity, it's really about retraining our brains. And then having those no interruption times, thank you so much. And again, this speaks to boundaries, and boundaries are limits, but thank you very much for thinking of me. However, I'm protecting my home life, or I'm protecting my work life, whatever it is for you. But stopping and asking ourselves, what am I using this for? Why am I doing it now? What else could I be doing? And once we, again, with the mindfulness, with the awareness, once we become more aware, these questions, they just become natural. So when we think of designing our space, having areas where they're device free. And when I started, physically closing my laptop and putting it in a drawer at the end of the day, because it removed that temptation. When I'm watching TV now, because I become so much aware of this, When I'm watching TV, I spend the time watching TV and I leave my phone upstairs with the ringer off. And yes, we have to fight that voice that says, what if there's an emergency? And what if there's an emergency? People will find a way to get in touch with us. But again, it's at each of our comfort levels. You know, having a no phone zone, perhaps at the dinner table, or no phones in the bathroom. Having designated quiet zones. And for those that have families, getting them to come up with the suggestions rather than us feel like we're enforcing it. Because whenever we tell someone to do something, they resist it. And then our relationship with having lunch and breaks. We were sitting at our desks and we were eating, we were drinking our coffees. And as we start returning, getting up and walking away from our desk, again, so our mind, our body, our energy can reset. And then for those that have had to use their bedroom as their office space as well, it's not about beating ourselves up as much as it is recognizing that we can change how we've been working for the last 2 years. So relationship management, managing expectations, having those courageous conversations with people, asking, what are the parameters? What are the times? And not everyone has a 9-to-5 job. And, 9 to 5, what does that even mean anymore? But having those, creating those expectations, having those conversations with team members, with leaders, with our family. And, even that, minimizing our channels. What is our relationship even with our TV? Again, the mindfulness, the awareness of how we just, turn it on and then we scroll and scroll and scroll and do there's nothing to watch, but then we turn something on anyway. So back to the point of overcoming burnout. What do we need more of in our lives? And what do we need less of in our lives? And then what is it that we're neglecting? It's just a gentle way, and it's not about blaming anyone as much as it is having a really courageous conversation with ourselves. And recognizing, our ability to read or to process information has changed. So giving ourselves that time, building it into our schedules so we're not overmanaged and overbooked. And then whatever it is for you, and for some that are parents, before the kids get up in the morning, that is the time that they can focus. But then perhaps we need to let go later in the day. It's going to be different for each of us. But it's also about recognizing what are natural dopamine boosts. What are the things that we get high on in life that aren't causing that ripple effect? And giving ourselves time to process information, to reflect on what went well in our lives. Last week, I talked about our relationship with fun. And about, fun involves connection, flow, and playfulness. Because the opposite of work isn't rest. The opposite of work is play. And those things that we do where we get that natural dopamine boost. We watched the documentary on the fellow that beat the 2-minute marathon. He was 1.59 hours in running the 26.2 miles. And everything he kept on saying in that was that, we're limited by our own thoughts. We're limited by our beliefs. And when we think about every habit that we have, habits create some of our identity as well. And our habits come from our belief system. So asking ourselves a question like, what would a person that, runs marathons do? What would a person that has screen life balance do? Now, what would a person that you admire do? So let's use the chat function and let's share what we do in our lives where we get that natural dopamine boost, where we have that feeling of connection. So again, the question is, what are some of the things that you do where you get that natural dopamine boost?
Everyone's got to wake up here, eh, Cynthia?
It's that, space. Again, technology, right? I'm not able to read body language.
Walking, that's a good one. Exercise for sure. I think there's certain habits, like sitting down to a coffee on a or Saturday morning, right? Makes me pretty happy.
Exactly. And how much time do we currently spend doing these? Gardening, exactly. Getting our hands in nature, spending time in nature. See, now this is it. Keep them coming. Music has the ability to change it changes us. It changes us our physiology. It accesses deeper parts of our brain. So, the last time I asked people, what is it that you need to release? Even driving, right, Stephanie, when it's not in rush hour traffic in Toronto. So these are the things that we need to bring back into our lives and make the commitment to them. And coffee, exactly. And there's the social aspect as well. And for a lot of people, when they're changing their habits, when it's perhaps crossed the line into a dependency or compulsiveness, it's about recognizing not only the action itself. So the itch comes and we have to, fix the itch, but it's also about the connection as well. So for some of us, that drinking the cup of coffee, it's about connecting with another human being as well. So it's also about reintroducing individual things that we do on our own, but also stepping back into the things that we do with other people. So it's, again, having that balanced portfolio of me time, us time, you time. And for you moms and dads, it's going to change. You'll get some of that time back. So whenever we talk about work-life balance, screen life balance, and it's not even about balance as much as it is about harmony. So recognizing what your limits are, having those boundaries, again, having the conversation, asking yourself, what am I missing in my life? What kind of a life do I want to create going forward? And then it's not only about communicating with others, but words are the most powerful drug known to mankind. And the stories that we tell ourselves either help us or they hinder us. So recognizing our beliefs around technology, recognizing our beliefs about ourselves and what it is that we're capable of, and then recognizing that our habits, when we set goals to change our habits, we tend to make them really large. And when we can break it down and focus on, and this comes from the Atomic Habits book, when we can break it down into the little steps that we're going to take and focus on the steps rather than focusing on the outcome, and then having the language to congratulate ourselves. having the language to appreciate ourselves, having the language to be compassionate for ourselves, because these last 2 years have changed us. And as we go forth, I was smiling the other day because I was presenting on March 4th. And it was like, March is this in-between time in life, isn't it? You know, we're not in winter, we're not in spring yet, but even March 4th. So rather than, keeping our focus on the past, as we go forward, as we go forth, what kind of life do we want to create? What kind of life do we want to recreate? Taking some of the good stuff with us and then releasing, letting go of some of the stuff that no longer serves us. And that's all it is. We've outgrown it. So this question of how much is too much? So filling in that blank. So some social time is more nutritious than other social time. Some screen time is more nutritious than other. For those of us that have children, and the guilt that people have been feeling about the amount of screen time that kids have had, perhaps rather than watching a cartoon or playing a game, giving them, having screen time where they're creating something. Whatever that blank is, it's about recognizing that some just fills us up more than others. And then what are your necessities in life? Both on and off screen. And certainly technology is a necessity, but what are the other necessities in your life? And then when we notice, again, that whole thing of emotion, when we're running away from those hard emotions and we pick up our phone, or we go and we grab something from the cupboard to try and, change our energy. So the thing is that once we recognize what it is we're reaching for to help us deal with the emotion, congratulate yourself. You noticed it. That's the beginning of habit change, because you're not on autopilot. Oh, and I need to keep saying this over and over again. It's not about beating ourselves up or feeling bad about it. We survived. We've been through one of the hardest times in our lives and everything else that went with it. So identifying even more off-screen activities that we can do. Even going for a walk yesterday, there's a mountain there's hiking trails across the street from where we're staying. And 2 years ago, and this is why I couldn't wait to get back here, because 2 years ago, I remember the first day I was trudging up the hill. And the last day I was like a gazelle, well, at least in my mind, running up. We were there yesterday, and oh my goodness, I kept on wanting to reach for my phone to see how many steps we'd climbed or what the elevation was. And then I just had to laugh at myself and say, I made the choice to leave my technology at home. So what are your temptations? Getting rid of the temptations. I remember when I gave up smoking, it was the same as when I gave up alcohol, and those weren't easy things to give up, because there was that social connection, because there was the habitual part of it. But I couldn't have cigarettes or alcohol in the house. There were some people that I needed to stay away from because the temptation was just too strong. So by, deleting the temptation, whatever it is, until we form new habits, it doesn't mean it's going to be forever. And then how about reclaiming recess for adults? I love it when I go by a school, when I drive by a school. Now, I don't stop and park there anymore because I don't want to be seen as a stalker, but it would just bring so much joy to my face, to me, to see kids outside playing, running around, playing tag. And then walking through the woods one day, back after our first, when we were in in our first lockdown. I try to avoid saying that word. And I remember walking through the woods, and there was a daycare center there, and there were kids climbing the trees and laughing. And it caused me to stop there, stop and cry, because I'd be missing it. So reclaiming recess for adults, having a digital Sabbath day. Oh, remember back in the days where you couldn't go shopping, you couldn't go to places because there was just that day where people took a break from it? Perhaps we need to reclaim that for ourselves. And back to the being aware of, how do we feel after we've engaged or after we've indulged in whatever it is? Monitoring our moods, recognizing the things that bring us up or the things that bring us down. And then, breaking the cycle. When you sit down, ask yourself, what is it that I'm doing? What is my priority? And then when you finished it, again, managing that stress response, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end, then get up and do something else. Okay, rather than finishing something and then scrolling on something, whatever it's going to be for you. So we know when it comes to habit change, there are some that, aren't even thinking of changing. And you can give them all kinds of statistics. You can tell them how bad it is for them. They're not going to listen. And then there are those that think about making the change. Okay, and this is where we start investigating. And this is why there's 129 million hits on Google about screen light balance. And so we're, gathering information, and then then we go into the preparation. And you see, sometimes people spend all of their time in the contemplation and the preparation. Oh, but this is where we need to start taking the smallest actions and changing just 1%, just so when you get a picture of how much time you're spending on something and decreasing that by just 1%, that gives you all kinds of time back that you can do those things that fill you up. And then when we look at, in habit change, and there's so many competing theories about how long it takes to change a habit. But after the first year, this is where people a lot of times reach that plateau, and they think, well, I deserve, I can reward myself. I'm past it. And a lot of people don't make it to that termination stage, that termination of, well, living successfully without whatever it is that's running your life. So we can, there are so many do's and don'ts out there. And this is like my cookbook or my recipe for life. So recognizing that everything changes, everything comes and goes. And if we can practice doing one thing at a time, that's how we're bringing more focus, and we can be more productive. The greatest productivity tool is our ability to think more deeply. And then remaining curious, not about beating ourselves up, just about being curious about what is it that needs to change. And, about the embracing the beauty of nature, walking on uneven ground a half an hour a day. Even the thing of mindful eating, not eating where we work, not eating in the same space or drinking in the same space where we're working, and taking that time to savor every bite or every sip. I learned something about hydrating the other day, because I've always been a gulper. It's like multitasking. Oh, no, got to drink more water, gulp it down. And my physiotherapist told me that when we gulp, it just comes right through us. So changing that habit now, where every half an hour, I take a sip of water. I take a mouthful of water. I haven't had to get up through the middle of the night by just changing that one small thing. So slowing down, recognizing when our engine is revving too high, slowing down and allowing ourselves the space and the grace to take in the information. And notice when you're multitasking. Notice when you've got 4 screens open and you really think that you're being productive. Oh, so, and I just, I'm not going to focus on the don'ts. I think that we do enough of that, but we don't have to react to every itch. We don't have to react to every thought that comes into our head. No, and our mind is really just the way that we talk to ourselves. So when we think about next time we're together, and it's going to be the 7th of this series, we're going to be talking about resilience micro steps, and it's going to be really just taking everything that we've learned and recalling it.